Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh, and Happy New Year. This is our first show of 2018, so welcome, and we're very happy to have you here. We're also very happy to welcome back an old friend to the show. He's been on many, many times. He's one of my favorite guests, and we always try and get him on as close to the first of the year as we can. George Curtis, our local attorney here in town, not just our only attorney, but one of many. But you are not only an attorney at law, but you are host of It's Your Law and It's Your Environment, both cable access shows, which can be seen here on cable access TV, and also, like this show, on YouTube. So you do a lot of things. You've got your hands into a lot of stuff, just like me.
Well,
it keeps us out of trouble, right?
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thank you for having me, and thanking you for the great job you do with Humane Society and through the community.
Oh, thank you.
It's important that people care.
Yep, it is.
And sometimes when you stick your neck out, as you do, there are some people there with a chopping block.
That's true, that's true. But my neck is still here,
That's
it's still
right.
intact, and a few chop marks here and there. But so what we want to do is, when we have you on early in the year like this, we always try and talk about some of the new laws that have come into effect. Laws usually go into effect the first of every year. You know, sometimes they go into effect at other times, but there are always new laws that happen at the first of the year, and they don't really get a lot of publicity, whether because they're not exciting laws or they don't really impact people a whole lot. But we do like to make people aware of what has changed and what's new, and keep you up to date and up to breast on things. So, or abreast of things, I guess I should say. So let's talk about what happened as of the first of the year that would affect people in the community. What has changed?
Well, over the past year, lots of bills have been put in the hopper. Not a lot of them have passed, but several that might be of some interest. Of course, before the election, there was some gerrymandering done for the intent purpose of controlling the election, so that the politician could pick the voters instead of the voters picking the politician.
Yep, exactly
now,
right.
while this was done by Republicans who happen to be in charge of both houses and the governorship, the Democrats have done it in the past. So I'm not saying that this is a character deficit
Right.
that's exclusively held by the Republicans.
Right.
The Republicans did, however, pass the voter registration law with the apparently obvious purpose of discouraging people of color, because they're the ones impacted by it, from voting, and
the elderly.
And the elderly, people who were more likely to vote Democratic. I mean, that they passed another law allowing their friends to double their contributions to political parties, and still another one to pass and give secret money by corporations to political parties. And so all of those things that were actually passed prior to the fall elections were designed to keep the people in power who were in power. Now, those aren't the only laws that we had. There is a law pending with respect to drunk driving, making the penalties even more severe, more time in lockup. And that, just a little bit of a comment, our local representative, Mike Schra, even though he's a member of the Republican Party, is really challenging that idea, because Mike's a thinker, and he really has come forth and said, wait a minute, if it didn't work the first charge, there was a second charge and conviction. There was a third charge and conviction. Now a fourth charge and conviction. We're going to lock this person up for years, so the taxpayers have to support him and his family. Maybe we should take another look at the punishment. Maybe drunk driving is an illness as opposed to a crime. And so that's...
Well, we know it's an illness.
Sure.
I mean, Mike isn't, he's not that smart that he's telling us something that we don't know.
Well, he's smart enough to buck his party on that subject.
Yeah, but you know what? That's on my list. It was a little bit further down, but as long as you brought it up, let's talk about that, because for years we've heard, oh, Wisconsin is going to get tough on drunk driving. We're going to get tough on drunk driving, and we're going to get tough on drunk driving. And yet we don't get tough on drunk driving. We are one of the worst states in the union when it comes to punishing drunken driving. And we just, I don't know, there's a case right now, it was on the news maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, where a gentleman was pulled over for, it was something very small, very innocuous. I want to say like maybe a broken taillight or something like that. And he ended up being taken to the Outagamie County Jail. And he's either been convicted 11 times of drunken driving, and this would be his 12th, or he's been convicted 12 times, and this will be his 13th. And he's still out there driving, George. This is ridiculous. I mean, why can't we lock these people up, and while they're locked up, get them treatment? And I don't care if we have to lock them up for years and years. I don't care. I don't want them out on the road.
Okay, nobody wants drunks on the road. But if we recognize that it's an illness that's also a crime, locking them up in our prison system, where you can barely get treatment for an amputation, is not solving the problem of dealing with their illness. Maybe this requires a segue at some point into our prison system, which is the most expensive, unnecessary luxury that we have, where we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on prisons that aren't really solving anything.
Right.
And more than we spend on education. And I visit prisoners. I always have, and I do more so recently. And nothing is so appalling as the lack of treatment that our prisoners get. And so that isn't working either.
Right. And I know that to be true. I've got friends and relatives who are in, the law enforcement system and who work with inmates and that kind of thing. And I know that we have a terrible problem of mental illness in this country. I know that. And there's not even enough money to cover half of the problems, much less all of them. But, we've got to figure out, I think that mental illness is at the root of a lot of our problems. Drunken driving, while it's not necessarily a mental illness, it is an illness. And then you've got the true mental illnesses where the people are running around killing people. And whether it's large groups of people or it's just one or two, it doesn't matter. It's the taking of innocent lives. And we have to find money to address problems like that.
Well, I think we have to treat them. I think alcohol is oversimplified by calling it an addiction, but it is certainly in part an addiction. And now we're seeing the new wave of addiction, which is the biggest killer, not only in this state, but in the other 49 states, the various drugs that are
The
available
opioids,
on the streets for little or no money. And these aren't bad people, but yet when they need a fix, they're willing to steal some lady's purse or rob a bank or go to a fast food place with a gun and that sort of thing. Yes, they perhaps should be locked up if they are treated when they're locked up.
So I hadn't heard Mike Schraw's, I didn't know where he stood on this, but what is he proposing the answer be?
Well, frankly, he's resisting the typical Republican knee-jerk of we get elected by saying lock them up longer, keep them there, we don't care what it costs. And all I'm saying is he's looked at the statistics and saying that hasn't really worked. Shouldn't we turn this worm and see if there's another way to deal with it? And he happens to be a chair of a committee that involves prisons. And so he is aware of how lousy a job our prisons are doing. He's one of the people who is concerned about and has visited the Lincoln Hills.
Oh,
Our
that's
governor
another topic
hasn't.
we'll get into. That's on the list also.
Okay. So I don't always agree with Mike, but on this one, he's actually done his homework, I think.
But he doesn't seem to have an answer as to how to solve the problem. And in the meantime, what is our current law, George, as far as how many times does a person get behind the wheel inebriated or drunk, if you will, on drugs, either legal or illegal, and endanger not only themselves but innocent people on the road or in their homes or whatever the case may be?
The most accurate answer I can give you, Cheryl, is I don't know what it is currently. The law I was referring to is pending right now to get them into prison quicker. And of course, we've already discussed what happens when they get in the prison, which is nothing, and the taxpayers pay for 3 levels of family.
Well, maybe we need to put them in prison and do some intervention and treatment while they're there. I just don't think that treating them on the outside is going to be the answer.
Well, that's probably true, and then of course that gets into where is the prison with respect to their families and their jobs. You know, if they're in a local jail where they can have Huber law and they can work and they can pay the jail for part of their upkeep, and there's some money left over for the family, and the family is nearby and can visit, so that the marriage doesn't become a casualty, and we have decent doctors taking care of them. That all makes perfectly good sense to me. But to send them 200-300 miles away, or in the federal system, 2,000 miles away,
right. No.
Really just commit some more crimes.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we have, 72 counties in the state, and we have 72 county jails, and I don't know what all of their populations are like, but we can certainly, I think, take on some of these additional folks.
That's true. But our jails and our prisons, as you alluded earlier, are really mental institutions.
They've become that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And mental institutions where there really is no professional there, or not enough professionals there, to deal with the real problem.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know that officers or whoever is higher up, they do a Chapter 51, which is basically commitment papers, sending someone to an institution because they believe that they truly are suffering from some kind of mental illness. They send them to an institution, and the institution turns right around, and for whatever reason, either space or they say, no, they don't suffer from a disease, and they send them back. So these people are going back and forth from jail to institution, and that's nonsensical to me also. We have to fix the whole problem, and I don't think we're fixing it with the things that we're doing, so we have to build a better mousetrap and figure something different out. In Lincoln Hills, which you just brought up, there's a perfect example. What in the world is wrong with Scott Walker? I don't know. We haven't talked before the show about this, so I don't know where you stand on it, but I'll tell you where I stand on it. There's a problem at Lincoln Hills, and for those viewing who don't know what Lincoln Hills is, it's where juveniles are sent when they have gotten themselves into the criminal justice system. And not all juveniles are sent there, but you have to meet certain criteria to be sent there. But it's been violent, and a lot of the guards or officers there have been injured. It's a dangerous situation. And so what the governor's proposing is spending $80 million, closing that one, and spending $80 million on 5, possibly more, smaller facilities. And I'm just sitting there thinking, A, you can't manage one. How in the hell are you going to manage 5 or more? And don't we have a better use for that $80 million? And you know it's not just going to be 80 million. It's probably going to be 90 or 100 million by the time this is all done and everything shakes loose. Why not, if you've got that kind of money, why not put it into fixing the problems in an institution that already exists?
Well, you've raised a bunch of points. Actually, Governor Walker has ignored this plan until he's facing 17 people running against him for governor.
Yeah.
And he stole the plan from a Democrat, Evan Goyke, a son of Mr. Goyke, who was our representative.
Gary Goyke, years ago.
And Evan Goyke's rationale was this. These are kids. Yes, they are kids in trouble and kids who probably deserve to be locked up. But to take them that distance from their homes, because most of them come from the southern third of the state, where they aren't going to have the impact of regular family visits, is already stupid in terms of the chances of really learning something, that it makes sense to have smaller institutions closer to home where they maybe can do things like Huber, that is, sleep there, go home, get a job, have contact with the family and that sort of thing. That's the model that Evan has had, and the governor's poo-pooed it for 2 years. In fact, rather than come up and investigate Lincoln Hills himself, he turned it over to the federal government to investigate it, and you know that you and I aren't going to live long enough for the end of that investigation.
Right.
A couple of people got fired. Most of them got transferred to better jobs and got a raise. But the idea of local prisons, besides the costs that you allude to, probably makes sense. I mean, having these kids that far from home and their support group reduces the chance of them having a successful evolvement into being useful citizens.
Okay,
and
that makes sense to me.
And that prison, I've been there, I think can be made into a adult prison. At the same time, we're overstuffed at all of our prisons, and maybe you and I differ on that, which is just fine, but many of these people who aren't violent, who aren't out killing people, to serve full sentences when they could be working in part, Huber in part, with their parents.
We agree on that, actually.
Okay.
We do. You and I agree on a lot more than we disagree on, George, really.
That's true.
But so that, having explained it to me that way, that makes sense. And as long as we do something useful with Lincoln Hills, rather than just selling it or letting it sit and languish, you know, the state prison in Green Bay is another issue that has been in the news so much lately, because again, there you've got, you know, I don't know all the problems up there, but you've got inmates who are attacking officers left and right, and these are hardcore inmates, and they are committing very horrific things on these officers and their superiors. You know, it's awful, and we have let that go on far too long as well.
Well, it's one of the oldest prisons in the country, and it isn't designed in a modern way to work safely for anybody. You're right. It should be closed down, and we should have something more modern. It's a dangerous place to work. The stress level of people who work in our prison system is just terrible. The turnover is just terrible. It's hard to work in a prison without becoming mentally ill yourself after a while.
Yeah, or at least a little cuckoo. One law that went into effect January 1st that I have not seen any media coverage on, and I know that the media was told about it because I told them about it, and still I never saw any story on it. But effective January 1st, and this probably affects a small, well, I'm sure it affects a small segment of our state population, but it was slipped into the budget, the most recent biennium budget, and effective January 1st, partners, domestic partners of state and county workers. I don't know if it affects or relates to city workers at all, but county and state employees, their domestic partners no longer, as of January 1st, are allowed to be covered by their health insurance. And I just think that that's wrong. It was slipped into that budget, as so many things are. I don't think people have any idea the kind of things on both sides of the aisle that are slipped into the budget and passed because it's part of the overall budget. But this is something that, was brought to my attention, and nobody covered it to the best of my knowledge, and yet it happened.
Well, you're right. And this is a common thing to slip something that is otherwise unpopular in with the budget. The budget is usually passed at 3 o'clock in the morning, where almost everybody is asleep, and it's based on hate. Like so many things that have taken place within the last year have given courage to the haters, and they've come forth with every petty little way that they can punish somebody who they think is different and therefore evil. Yeah. You're absolutely correct.
So there's tort laws that are pending. You mentioned that to me. So let's talk about some of the things that are pending as far as tort reform, civil procedure, class action suits. So many things to talk about.
Okay, well, of course, we keep in mind that the Republican Party is in charge of both bodies in the state legislature. They've got the votes to pass anything they want to vote. And if we follow the money, which is the only thing I'm 100% sure of, we know that the Republican supporters are corporations, are wealthy people, are businesses, and they want protection from the court system. They want to in every way make it more difficult for an ordinary citizen who feels wronged by an insurance company or another corporation from getting redress in the courts. One of the things they do is increasingly limit access to the jury, because the jury and the ballot are the only two parts of democracy are left after 1776 and another 200 years. And so they have, well, first of all, in almost every contract you see today, you've given up your right to a jury. They've, you've agreed to arbitration, and when you find out who's arbitrating it, it's 4 employees of the company that you're complaining about.
Yeah.
But at any rate, what has happened in the legislature? Well, they've got some legislation right now to reduce the interest rate, because there is still a law that says if an insurance company doesn't pay and you've made the proper claim, you get 12% interest on that. Well, no, they've changed it to prime.
Oh.
So they've cut it in half. Those poor insurance
Sure.
companies, they've only got
Yeah.
all of the money, all of the legislature.
They've got all the money. They've bought all the politicians. They're sitting in beautiful, beautiful buildings.
Absolutely.
But
they don't have to pay interest. So they've weakened that particular law. Then in the area of discovery, they have tried to take away the right of litigants to get into discovery. They claim it's being abused. They've dealt with the frivolous lawsuits again. We've had a frivolous lawsuit law for at least 25 years, but they believe that there are all these frivolous lawsuits when really there are fewer lawsuits than there were 40 years ago. And frivolous discovery, frivolous wasting of the time of the courts. There are fewer trials than there were 20, 30, and 40 years ago. It's all based on appealing to the ignorance of people with checkbooks. But the question that my dog could answer is, who's more likely to abuse the system by filing a groundless lawsuit or by running on lots of stupid discovery, depositions and motions and things like this? The plaintiff's lawyer who only gets paid if he wins?
Yep.
Or the defense lawyers who are being paid by the hour?
Yeah. Yeah, and they just wear you down. They throw more and more paperwork your way, and they really make you jump through a lot of hoops to get a pittance of what many people should be getting.
And they now have a very complex law on class actions to make them difficult to impossible, and allowing the court to appoint the lawyer in charge of the class. So what incentive is there for a private lawyer to start one and involve all that money? But they've taken a step further, and they've put rules about the financing of a class action and how the court has to be involved in how it's financed to make it even more difficult. What they want, and they're getting it all too rapidly, is basic corporate immunity from responsibility.
Sure.
And of course, it's happening on the national level even more severely. You look at the recent so-called tax reform. It may have helped some individuals, but that's got a short timeline on it, if at all. But basically, what it's really aimed to is cut corporate taxes in half, cut billionaires' taxes even more, make sure that you can inherit, what is it now, $111 million without paying
without paying an inheritance
an
tax.
inheritance tax. So again, we follow the money. This is the kind of legislation that's going through Congress. This is the kind of legislation that's going through the state of Wisconsin.
I want to ask you a question, George, about class action lawsuits, and maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I have found myself, over the course of many years, involved in class action lawsuits that I knew nothing about, but all of a sudden I'll get these things in the mail. And here's an example. One came, and I'm not going to say the name of the battery, but I received something in the mail that said, our records show that you purchased X kind of batteries between such and such a date and such a date, and you are a member of a class action lawsuit. If you want to opt out, then, complete this paperwork and send it back. If you don't opt out, you will be considered part of the class, as you already are, and the settlement will come to you at whatever point. And, and they've usually all come true. I mean, I've gotten very teeny tiny checks, or I've gotten a coupon for some additional type of product or whatever. My question to you is, how do they know, when you think about all the millions of people in this country who, for example, buy batteries for flashlights, for, our little mice that we use, our mouses that we use, whatever you want to call it, mices, for our computers. All these things take batteries. And so can you imagine the millions and millions of batteries we're buying? And that's just one of these class action suits. How do they find who all these people are?
Well, some of them they find because of television, newspaper ads. We've seen that go.
Oh, we see those all the time, all night long.
That's right.
All day long.
I haven't turned on a TV set for 15 years, so I don't see them. But I've been involved in some of them indirectly because my clients came to me, and I got with the group that looked like you were winning. And Chandex, the anti-smoking drug that does help you quit smoking, but it also can make you crazy and have hallucinations and drive through 7 cars or 7 houses, your pick, things like that. We had other class actions involving bad hips. In the greedy race of all of the drug companies to get all of the money for hips, they really put hips on the market that weren't out of the right material, and the movement of the material was grinding off these metals which were in the blood system and killing people. And so everybody who had that kind of a hip had a chance to get in the class action. We've had them with feminine hygiene products, with bad gas caps, with exploding batteries.
Talcum powder causing,
and that sort of thing.
Cancer.
And I don't know, I know enough about it to be dangerous because, frankly, there are these big law firms that hunt for bad products, then solicit people who have been injured. When they get enough of them so that they think they can file an action and persuade the court that this is a valid class, and they have to do that with a court. And of course, they know which courts are somewhat liberal. And so you'll find a lot of these actions are in California, where in that circuit things are a little more liberal. Then they get more people in the group. They sign people up, and they have the right to opt out or sign up. Sometimes it works. The typical situation is that they get $7 million, and when they get through all of the expenses, which are $4 million, and then they distribute it, you get a little bit of a check. But I've had clients who got checks for 70, 80 grand for bad hips and things like that. And,
well, for something like that, they should. And you know, another class action that I can remember very clearly was, you know, they had overcharged interest or something like that. Some of the credit card companies got dinged for that. I don't know if it was with the Federal Trade Commission or whomever, but they got tagged for something like that. And that's easy to find out because you just go through your list of credit card holders. So that's easy. But and then I've seen other things where certain tuna was an example, and they just put it out there. They said if you purchased any of this tuna between such and such a date and such a date, you know, we want you to file a claim. Well, still waiting for my tuna. And that was a couple years ago. Don't know if I'll ever see it. Probably not, but we'll see. But I have gotten these other smaller type checks, and I'm just thinking, how do they know that I bought batteries? You know, I mean, or specifically that kind of battery. It's just.
Well, if you took any back, there might be a record of it. If you filed a claim, there might be a record. Otherwise, I understand that they do tons of mailing and they do a lot of television advertising. And then once they can file a case, they have the right of discovery. So all of the information about users, purchasers, and so on, they can get from the manufacturer. The most recent one I had was somebody was taking a medicine, I think it was for anxiety, and then he saw a television ad that if you took such and such a medicine for anxiety, you may have a case, and he came in and we did an investigation. Unfortunately, these class actions really are only good against the drug company that has the patent as long as the pill was sold by that drug company, and as soon as the patent runs out and they're generic, you're out of luck because you can't prove what company produced the generic. Well, this unfortunate guy got the generic. He got a bargain. It was cheaper, but we can't prove who manufactured it, so he doesn't get any money.
Yeah. Oh, that's too bad. One other question I had for you. I believe it was like, I think it was 2 years ago when you were on during the first of the year, and we were talking about how it's becoming increasingly difficult, almost next to impossible, to sue nursing homes over neglect and just outright careless cases where people are injured or, worse yet, killed in nursing homes because of neglect and so forth. And yet I keep seeing commercials on television that talk about if you've got a loved one who's been injured or who died in a nursing home, you know, we want you to call us. And I mean, they make it seem like it's very easy to go after these institutions. And yet you said it's
there are
very
two
hard.
answers to that question. First of all, the law that was passed basically held that the people working in a nursing home cannot testify on behalf of the district attorney if there's a criminal case involving an injury or death, or on behalf of a civil litigant. They just are not allowed to give testimony.
See, and that is so wrong. I said it 2 years ago, and I'll say it again. That's not right. I mean, especially if a district attorney calls you in. I mean, can they not subpoena them?
You can subpoena them all you want.
They still can't be
talk.
compelled to testify.
They can't talk. Now, still, some of these cases are surviving, and what you're seeing of the people advertising them are for a couple of reasons. One is they're usually major cases. If you drop grandma and she breaks a hip, she either suffers terribly and dies or just dies. And so they are not piddly cases. Why is that significant? The whole tort system, that is the accident system, has so shrunken due to Republican legislation over the last 30, 40 years that these are some of the few cases that are left. How do you win them? I've got a couple of them pending right now. Well, we hope to win them by getting the investigation from the state. They're required to do that, and sometimes a federal investigation, so we get the record.
Yeah.
Now, we still can't make these people testify, but with the record, we know what the feds figured out what happened, and so we have some discovery. Now, we have to use open records law, and we have to beg and kiss and beg some more and then threaten, and with the Walker regime, it takes 110 days to get anything. But so people want the cases because usually the injuries are major, and because the rest of the tort system has pretty much been eaten away. When I came to this town, I would say that there were 25 lawyers who were actively involved in litigation involving accidents. Now I'd be hard pressed to name two. You know, it is, and that's true throughout the state and frankly throughout the country, and it's not accidental.
Right.
This is what the National Chamber of Commerce is after. Nobody should have the right to sue business, manufacturer, government, or anybody else. It'll take away the rights of make the citizens powerless except they can pay their taxes.
Yeah, yeah. And pay high prices for products that
That's right.
may or may not work, may or may not injure you, but tough luck.
Well, they're made in
can't do anything about
Formosa,
it.
and the company has changed its name 3 times in the last month, so you can't find it. And another bit of tort reform has said, well, you've got to sue the manufacturer.
Well, how do you do that?
Well, that's the point.
I know that you wanted to talk about some of the things that have been going on locally with large companies. And when I say local, I'm talking not just Oshkosh, I'm talking about Wisconsin as a whole, because Foxconn is a big company that is now going to be part of our footprint here in Wisconsin. And the jobs that they propose to create may or may not come to fruition. But you wanted to talk about some of these things. So let's get right in our own backyard. Let's talk about Oshkosh Corporation. Most people in town who have been around here for any length of time still call it Oshkosh Truck Corporation. You know, they have finally come to an agreement with the city where they're going to buy a portion of Lakeshore Municipal Golf Course to build their corporate headquarters, and there's millions of dollars that we as a city are spending to help make that happen. They, of course, are going to be spending a lot of money to make it happen. But what was your concern about that? I know what my concern was, and I've made it very clear on this program on a few different occasions, but what is your concern with it?
Well, this is just a local example of a national problem that businesses that are important, and no business is more important than Oshkosh Corporation for the people in this community. It's money. They have discovered that they can hold up the taxpayers, make cities and states bid against each other, and agree to pay millions of millions of dollars that may not be recovered just to hold a business. Foxconn is a good example, but really they're Amazon, Disney, all of the car companies have done that sort of thing. I just came back from visiting family in South Carolina and Kentucky, where they've gotten big companies to build manufacturing places there because they gave them the land, they gave them tax-free, they gave them money, they bribed them really, and they assured them that they'd have legislation like Scott Walker in Wisconsin so that the unions couldn't get out of bed. Now, that's what it's done. And of course, the politicians give in to that because it gives them a leg up on re-election. It's happening everywhere. It's not just Walker, and it's not just the city fathers here. And of course, these businesses are really in the driver's seat.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the tacks that Oshkosh Corp used was, well, you know, we may have to look elsewhere, either elsewhere in the state or elsewhere out of Wisconsin.
It's a common threat, and frankly, while I don't have any specific knowledge on that matter, I don't doubt that there are other cities and states that would have paid a pile of money for Oshkosh Corporation to move there. It isn't an idle threat. This Foxconn outfit had already gone through that in another state. I think it was in Pennsylvania, and then after they got these millions and millions of dollars, then they backed out because I think there was a new governor came in and says this thing smells. In our Foxconn situation, Michigan offered more money than we did.
Yeah, well, you know, as far as Oshkosh Corp goes, I have said all along, and so I'm not afraid to say it again, that my problem with that was they were already, it's the way I understand it, they were already looking elsewhere before the city even stepped up to the plate. And yet, oh, we're so loyal to Oshkosh. We love being here. We're so enamored with Oshkosh, and yet you're looking elsewhere. And so if that is true, and I kind of have gotten the impression from the folks in the city that I've talked to, that, yeah, that is true, then I don't like that. If you're that devoted to Oshkosh, the city of Oshkosh, then you should have come here first and said, listen, we want to build a corporate headquarters. What can you do to help accommodate that and make that desire happen? Don't go sneaking around, you know, outside of the city. And so that was my problem with it. And I hope that we don't get into trouble with this. It's going to be a pay-as-you-go TIF. So, you know, they're not going to get in a situation, I don't think they can get in a situation where they're getting millions of dollars from the city without actually producing something. Foxconn is a whole nother thing. And I'm sorry, but I think that people in Illinois should have been part of that deal also, because they're going to benefit royally from it because of where the place is being located.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's all about money. All too often we've learned that business ethics is an oxymoron. And I have enjoyed this controversy about the athletes who don't stand or bow or cross their heart at a game, well, because of the flag. Well, it's because we've got the wrong flag. Today, our flag should be a dollar bill.
Boy, that's, I hadn't thought about that, but that is really a good idea. I mean, that's clever, you know?
Well, it's realistic.
Yeah, because that is what controls everything.
Sure.
It's all about money. It doesn't matter what it is, it all comes down to money. So when are you going to start printing up those flags and getting them out on the open market?
I'm looking for a good deal on poles. You know?
Call Scott Walker. He can maybe set you up with something like that. He can get you fixed up.
Well, he might, but it's interesting that now Scott Walker has adopted Evan Goike's plan for the prison that he poo-pooed for 2 years and wouldn't even look at the prison. Now Scott Walker all of a sudden has come up with numbers for education that are identical to the numbers that Tony Evers had, that while Walker for the last 2-3 years has been shrinking money for education, shrinking money for the environment, and elections coming up.
And that's what this is all about.
That's exactly what it's
all about that.
Sure.
And if people can't see through that when they go to the polls to vote, then I think they need some new glasses, or if they don't have glasses, they need to go get checked out and get a pair, because this is what it all comes down to. It's
sure.
just about his election.
But people vote their pocketbook.
Yeah.
And the people who have their values promoted by Scott Walker not only will vote for him, they should vote for him. I'm not saying that those people are evil. I mean, it's pretty clear that one party is backed by and supported by and is paying back to corporate business interests. And the other party is a little more concerned about the environment and labor and consumers and the elderly. And they each collect money. They're not saints.
Right.
They collect money, and then if you follow the money, you'll see how they're going to vote.
Yeah. You know, I want to go back for a moment before we run out of time to the drunken driving thing, where, you know, you talk about money and lobbying organizations. Where is MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, been on this drunken driving legislation? I can't even tell you the last time I heard of MAD being mentioned.
Well, I agree. When I used to do some criminal defense work, and we always wanted to find out if a juror or a prospective juror was mad, because we knew we'd already lost that defense. I haven't heard much from them recently either. The Tavern League is a very, very powerful lobbying group, and they help out a lot of legislators with money at election time. I'm not sure who else has a dog in that fight.
Yeah. Well, it just seems to me that they should be front and center on some of these issues, and they're not. We're almost running out of time here. We've got about 9 minutes left. I want to take a look at some of these other things that were on our list here, so that we can be sure and touch bases here with them. We've talked a little about tax reform. NAFTA, Paris Accord, the Russian connection. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Russian connection is going to sell a lot of newspapers, and considering how thin our newspapers are, they need something to sell them. But I think a lot's going to come out of that way, and I think that it's just one more indication that Trump was not prepared to be president, that when he got this job, he knew less about the Constitution than the average public school 8th grader. And a lot of this stumbling is something that's just based on ignorance. Then secondly, I think that he didn't really hire the right people, and some of it was family who were really not equipped or prepared. This job requires a lot more education in government than he happened to have, and he did a little bit of stumbling that way. Then he got in his right-wingers, and most of those people had an axe to grind, and they weren't looking out for the country. They were looking out for their particular issues of white supremacy and things like that, so that Trump was not very lucky in terms of the people he surrounded him with, and then, of course, his own tweeting, and so that you never knew, and it's getting better, I think, but you never knew whether that was a kindergarten or whether it was a kennel. It seemed to vary by the hour.
Well, you know, his mouth and his tweeting, because that's also his mouth, it's going to get him in trouble. I mean,
it's kept him in trouble.
It has. He has been proven to be a liar time and time and time again. I don't care what the issue is. You can find clips of him saying one thing one day, and the next day, sometimes the next hour or two, you can find him saying something different. It seems to depend on the crowd that he's in front of, or maybe he just truly can't remember what in the world he's saying, but there's no doubt that he's a liar. And, you know, a year ago, oh, I'll talk to Mueller. Yeah, I'll talk to Mueller about Russia. Now today, probably not so much. You know, it's so silly. And this is a president who is the least presidential person that I think we've seen ever in our lifetimes. You know, using expletives like he did today to talk about some of these other countries that are poor, that are impoverished, and to liken them to the word that he used, I think it's just so wrong. It's so mean-spirited. It's so unprofessional, and it sure as hell is unpresidential. This man is just, he's a joke, he's ridiculous, and he's an embarrassment.
That was the word I was going to use. I think that because he is the emblem of our country that people in other countries have, he's the picture, and he's become a caricature. And I think it's sad. I think it has brought the status of the United States down at an important time when there are a lot of potentially dangerous things going on. It's not only his juvenile attitude, his kindergarten responses to anybody who questions him. It's his position on things, on treaties that should be international law, and he thinks that we can just withdraw on them because that was a bad deal. AFTA is awfully important to our farmers and our industry, and he just said, well, it was a bad deal. We're out of it. We'll renegotiate it. Then he wonders why Canada says, okay, then we don't need your milk.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with your milk?
Yeah.
Then on the Paris global warming thing, he has just embarrassed us because we've been after all of those other industrial countries to stop polluting our air, and now he says, well, it's not binding on us, it was a bad deal. This is unfortunate. He's taken any dignity out of the presidency that used to be there.
Everything in his eyes is a bad deal.
Yeah.
And yet all I see him doing is dismantling piece by piece, day by day, hour by hour, anything that Barack Obama did. He seems to just be targeting everything that Obama did. It doesn't matter what it's about. If it had Obama's name on it, he's trying to tear it down.
That's true. And he's going beyond that. He's tearing down a lot of important things that Republicans did with respect to protecting our environment, with respect to the pipeline, with respect to drilling, with respect to mining in parks. He's totally ruined the EPA, and of course we made our contribution. Our former DNR secretary will help him ruin what's left of the EPA. I don't like what he's doing, but at the same time, it's good for business, which is the new god for our country.
Just in our final minutes here, want to talk a little bit about local elections, because there's not a whole lot of stuff happening there. We've got our Oshkosh Common Council. We've got 3 seats coming up. We've got 4 candidates, 3 of whom are incumbents. The school district, same thing. 3 seats, 4 people running, 3 of whom are incumbents. Only a couple people who are even being challenged for Winnebago County Board. And then we have the Winnebago Circuit Court and Judge Thomas Gritton, who I don't know if he intended this to happen or it just accidentally happened, but he did not. The newspaper said that he missed a filing deadline, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that if you don't intend to run, you're supposed to file papers that say you don't intend to run, and he did not do that. And then, of course, the date and hour for filing your paperwork came, and there was nothing there. So Tom Gritton's name is not going to be on the ballot, And now, a gentleman from the DA's office, Scott Seaman, is that how he pronounces it?
Yes.
Seaman? Okay. So he's running unopposed for the seat.
Okay, I don't know why Tom Gritton isn't on the ballot. I don't know if he intentionally decided that this wasn't worth the trouble. I've had civil cases in front of him, and I think he did a very competent, fair job.
I agree.
He was not a civil lawyer by experience, so he had to learn, and it's our job as lawyers to teach him. Now, his background was in criminal law, and he was known to be a harsh sentencer, and he got very bad review in the state, but you know, just a few lawyers can do that to you by making multiple complaints. And so I don't put any real credibility in that, but I don't know why he's not running. Maybe he wants to go in another direction. It's not really that fun a job. It's a difficult job. We're trained to be specialists, and then we make you a judge where you're supposed to be an expert on 40 areas of the law. If you do it right, you'll work 24 hours a day. I wouldn't take the job.
Yeah.
So there could be lots of reasons for it. And I think on the local level, there's a lot of reasons to not be a politician. You don't really want a free genealogy put together by your opponent. The money's not that good.
That's true. I
You're
mean,
going to be criticized no matter what you do.
A city councilor or a school board candidate, you know, a couple $1,000s, maybe $3,000, if that, for the year. And there's an awful lot of work, many, many hours. If you're doing your job right, and you're actually doing your homework on the issues before you, it's a lot of hours, and you have to field phone calls and listen to people's complaints quite a bit. They usually complain more than they praise you for a job done, and so it's kind of a thankless thing, really. But I'm grateful for the people who step up to run. But you know, I can remember years ago in 2005, I ran for city council, and I think there were like 19, I don't remember how many, but there were a lot of people who ran. And that was probably the largest slate of candidates ever, you know, but haven't seen that since, and I don't know that you ever will, so.
Well, we have to encourage public participation, and every once in a while we have to do it ourselves so we have a little bit of credibility, but it's a very risky, demanding thing with very little reward. It's like being a football coach.
Yeah.
My kid should be quarterback.
That's right. George, it's been fun. Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Happy New Year to you, and I'm sure we'll be talking again before next year. We'll probably be meeting again sometime in the next 6 to 9 months. So that's going to do it for us. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. We always appreciate your company. Thanks to the crew. Thanks to you. And we will see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.